recording. And welcome to the 26th episode of the Online Network of Independent Learning Professionals. Today we're going to be speaking with Bethany Vogel about a case study from the Army's National Training Center. It's super exciting. I didn't realize this until Bethany approached me, but she actually lives at the National Training Center where they do giant military simulations with tons of people. And so she decided to learn a little bit more about it and share with us how they actually put this on and some of the lessons learned. So I think that's really cool. And I just love her curiosity. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bethany. But before I do, if you have any questions as she is going through her presentation and telling us all about the National Training Center, definitely put them in chat and we'll get to those questions. And then Bethany has some questions for us at the end. So make sure you pay attention because we'll have some group discussion. And maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, Bethany, and your company and you know, like how this even came about doing this, talking about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the opportunity to present. Let's see, we moved out here to the National Training Center about, 9 months ago, so in September of last year. So right now I do just a little bit of subcontracting with a couple different companies. So this is actually kind of my first dive into contracting, and really it's because of the Army that I have to do this. Where we're located in the middle of the Mojave Desert is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The closest target is an hour and a half away. So there are no jobs. So I had to figure out how to get a different job. So I love this profession and I love how we can do it from all different places. So I do a lot of work from home, just like all of us do. But I also think it's kind of crazy that this training professional got stationed at the National Training Center. So I figured I might as well take advantage of the opportunity and just try to learn a little bit more. So it's been kind of a unique adventure. So this is my husband. This is Captain Walter Vogel. He participates in this giant simulation that goes on here at the Army's National Training Center. So it's been a unique way for us to kind of discuss training all the time in our household. So anyways, I'm just going to go over kind of a brief overview of what this training is, like Patty said, kind of as a case study, and then discuss kind of some of the essential elements. I've got some questions, so hopefully this will really just incite a lot of discussion. So like I said, the purpose of this presentation is really, we're just going to view a complex training simulation. I love this group. I love how everybody speaks up and talks and we share the different things that we're doing or not doing, because it really allows me to kind of think of some creative ways to create training or education in the future. So I hope that it does the same for you guys. So, welcome to Fort Irwin, California. Like I said, we're out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, just south of Death Valley. So, if you come out here, kind of looks a little bit like Mars. There's actually a little bit more green out here in California, but it's kind of an interesting environment. So, this is the environment that we train in. So we're halfway between LA and Vegas. We've got land out here that's pretty much the size of Connecticut. We've got about 9,000 people here on post, more on a permanent basis. They've actually been doing military training out here since around World War II. It's kind of bounced around from different organizations, but the National Training Center, as we know it, opened in 1979. So why the Mojave Desert? Well, that is definitely something that I ask myself all the time. Why are we stationed out here? No trees, Mars, you know, all that kind of stuff. But really the reason is so that we can be able to have the space to move around big equipment like this, and then be able to do things like this with the equipment and 3,000 to 5,000 people. So that kind of makes sense. We're actually the only Army in the world that puts on this large of a training event. So we have about 50,000 U.S. and multinational forces that train here throughout the year. We've got about 1,200 square miles of training area. That includes about 11 villages. We've got 600 role players. We have 800 observer controllers. And then there's about 100 video cameras out there as well. So when I say large scale training event, pretty large. But you know, that can also bring a lot of complexity to the situation. And sometimes you don't need that complexity, sometimes you do. So why? Why does it have to be this big? So in order to really answer that question, I have to give you just some super quick Army 101 and tell you how the Army is structured. So the smallest unit in the Army is a squad. It's about 4 to 10 soldiers. 3 to 4 squads make up a platoon, and then the Army's hierarchy kind of begins to build from there. So this training event that we have out here is a brigade training level event. So battalions will go out and train on their own all the time. But this is the only place where all the battalions can kind of come together and train as one unit, as a brigade. So the primary target training for this audience is the brigade commander and his staff. So for example, the entire Dagger Brigade from Fort Riley, Kansas is going to pack up all of their stuff, their equipment, their gear, their people. They're going to ship out here to Fort Irwin, California for about a month. And we have different units that rotate through here every month. So what we call that unit who's rotating through and being trained, the rotational training unit, or the RTU. So I'll refer to them as the RTU. So let's look at what their schedule would kind of look like for that month. So the first week is called RSOI. It's reception, staging, and onward integration. So basically what that means is that's where they get all of their equipment in, they do all their inspections, they put on laser tag equipment. That's how they do kind of the battlefield effects. It's like a giant game of laser tag out here. And then the second and third weeks is when they go into the box. So that is the training area. That's when the main simulation happens. And then after those 2 weeks is regeneration. That's when they bring all their equipment out. They get it ready to be shipped back home. So the simulation itself is over, but that is an operation in itself. And then the next month, we have a brand new RTU here. So what happens in the box? Actually, when you're in the box, you are magically transported into the land of Atropia. So they say NTC, the box, is right on the border of Atropia and Donovia. So the story goes, the RTU has been invited to Atropia at the request of the Atropian government to help restore the international border from the invading Donovians and their paramilitary insurgents, the Bila Suvar Freedom Brigade, or the BFB. So obviously this scenario is probably going to sound slightly familiar, just with different names, but that's really because the Army is training for a very real and possible scenario. So the Army puts together a whole series of manuals, and then they put together an 800-page document called The Date, and it describes the environment out here. It describes the backstory, what events could possibly happen during the training. We have an opposing force that plays the role of the Donovians permanently stationed here, as well as civilians that act as role players for town inhabitants or tribal elders, or even people that play media. So during those 2 weeks, while we're in the box, we go through training phases. These are scripted and free play events that go on. They're 2 to 3 days long, and these phases may overlap each other. And so we go through these 5 or 6 events that could or could not happen. But first, there's usually an attack, whether it's a civilian attack or a counterinsurgency. Then we have to defend that attack. Sometimes there's movement to contact, which means you don't really know where the enemy is, but you're just kind of moving around. And then all of a sudden you come across them, you have to fight. Sometimes you have to deal with non-combatant evacuation operations. So Americans, other coalition forces, or civilians who need to get out of the country, you have to deal with getting them out safely. And then you also have to deal with internally displaced persons. So these people that have been affected by the battle, you have to get them to a camp safely again, and then you have to screen them, make sure that the enemy hasn't infiltrated that camp, and then of course going to attack you. So after that, we have what they call a Sobe, which is a suspension of battlefield effects. So basically we pause the simulation. And what we do is an after action review. So the guy talking there, you may notice him, but this is actually, it's the observer coach role, facilitating the after action review. So they're going to provide guidance throughout the operations, but here they're giving feedback. So these reviews deal with what happened, both the good and the bad, what changes, and then what changes need to happen in the future. So throughout all that, who wins? It really goes back to our objectives and purpose of the training. Most of the RTU would say getting to go back home to their families would be considered winning. But like I said earlier, the purpose of this training is to provide that brigade level training event. So essentially NCC gives the brigade commander a chance to lead operations with his staff. So having that opportunity is really kind of winning. So for the rest of the learners, it's to figure out how to make the decisions, find out what is missing in their current procedures, and or just their basic knowledge. So at the end of the 14 days, the training phases cease. There's an executive summary or an EXSUM that's written for each battalion. It's a narrative kind of describing what went right, what went wrong, where could they improve, but the real win kind of comes when soldiers are in battle and the training here taught them how to survive. So I'll pause. Are there any questions kind of about the training thus far?
Not yet, so
okay,
we're good
perfect.
to go.
Okay. So that's an overview of what happened. So I just kind of want to jump into kind of some takeaways that I've taken from the training and kind of learning how it's put together, what happens throughout it. So the first thing that I think is really interesting is just the analysis and the design that happens of such a crazy training event like this. So the objectives are designed beforehand by the brigade commander's boss. He's the division commander, he's a 2-star general, so he's been in the Army a long time. But he creates the unit training plan from the Army standards. They call those standards the Combined Arms Training Strategy, or CAT. So the objectives of the training that happens here will align with the CAT. So they'll go through, they'll pick scripted events to happen. There's 78 scripted events that they can pick to happen in those training phases. That's developed in that date that I was talking about, that 800 huge long document. And it'll describe exactly how the event should go, what the different things needs to happen. So for every event that happens, there's a set of collective tasks that occur. So for example, soldiers will have to conduct a non-combatant evacuation operation, or a NEO. So they're getting all the Americans and coalition citizens out of a country where their security is rapidly deteriorating. So in order to do this, they're going to have to complete several associated tasks, like providing local security, screening personnel, conducting an air movement, that type of thing. So in order for those specific tasks to happen, soldiers have to follow a list of individual tasks, or SOPs, that should already be established. So for example, in order to conduct an air movement via helicopter, they need to identify or mark where to pick the people up, where to drop them off, the route they'll take, that sort of thing. So soldiers should know how to do those types of things already, because like I said, it's documented in their SOPs, or the CAS is going to describe how to do it. So an example of that is, the SOP for marking the pickup zone during daytime can be with green smoke, or at night it can be with a green chem light. So kind of what I took from all of that is to integrate tasks for each level of learner. I think that what this allows for is the senior leaders have to figure out how to synchronize the resources and the operations with time and then space, so on the battlefield, to desire, or to get that desired end state, like evacuating non-combatants. So they got to figure out how to make it happen. And then the soldiers have to figure out how to carry out the elements of the task itself. So they have to figure out, are we going to use the green smoke or the green chem lights? And oh, by the way, how do we initiate the green smoke or the green chem light, that sort of thing. So really, this is how we maximize training. But I also think that this is where we can provide a lot of value for our training, because as we do this analysis in the design, you can find out a lot about what procedures are you missing. Are they effective or not effective? You can see a lot of the consequences as they're played out throughout the simulation. So you really find the efficiencies and inefficiencies of an organization. We talk a lot in this group about, how do we communicate the value of our training to an organization, with the value-based pricing that we've talked about and all kinds of different things like that. And I really think that this is a really neat way to be able to express that value. So my question to you that we'll discuss at the end is, when are maybe some opportunities that you've been able to maximize training, and have you ever been able to express to clients that the analysis and the design of training itself can provide XYZ value to them? So moving along. The next thing that I think is really interesting is basically what they do is action learning. Action learning goes through, and you're going to ask first of all, you're going to pause, which they do that in a Sobe, and then they do the after action review, and they go through kind of the 4 questions that go along with action learning. What happened? Why did it happen? What should have happened? And what are we going to make happen next? So the AAR does that, and then the OCs help facilitate that. So there's a specific role in this training that really helps to provide that. So the other thing that the OCs do is they also help with the evaluation at the end. So, I mean, essentially, I really feel like this is the value of reflection in training. I think it's interesting that they provide so much emphasis on reflection and feedback throughout the entire process. Because as we know, without reflection, learning just isn't going to happen. So kind of my takeaway from that is to implement these action learning strategies. So a couple of questions that I have are maybe just what are some creative or really effective ways that we encourage learners to reflect in training. The last one that I'll mention is just this idea of evaluation. So brigade commanders have to go through and figure out, hey, were we proficient at what we did? To what level were we proficient? And actually, not only do the division and the brigade commanders do this, but leaders at every single level will go through this and do this kind of self-evaluation. And then, of course, like I said earlier, the OCs kind of provide that external evaluation. And I mean, really the end goal is they're trying to figure out, are we ready to deploy so that we can achieve the nation's objectives? So I think it's really interesting how those two are, they support each other, both the self-evaluation and the external evaluation. So yeah, my question here is kind of what do you do to encourage your learners to evaluate their own performances? Do our evaluations support this? When should or shouldn't this happen during training? Because I think there's probably a place for both of those things to happen. So kind of leads us to our discussion, maybe some places to start. So here are kind of some of the questions that we went through, so I'll kind of throw it out to you guys.
Awesome, thanks Bethany. Wow, it's like this is certainly what I would call high stakes training. It must be effective, and you know, the results are very, very important. And I love how they have, you know, like you said, the self-reflection and then also the overall reflection and how they kind of work together. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and if anybody has any thoughts at this point, feel free, or, you know, about any of the questions, you know, we don't have to start with the first one. If you've just got a thought about any of the questions, let me know. And it would also be interesting if anyone has actually done any training that is, you know, like what's the largest training that you've done? So maybe let's take a second and reflect, like this type of simulation. This is, how many people are involved in these?
3,000 to 5,000.
3,000 to 5,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot. I mean, that's a really big one-time event, you know, type of training. And is it different people each time? Did you say this is like a monthly basis?
Yeah. So we'll have units rotate through here. So it's a one-time event for the learners, but here at this post, it's an ongoing operation. Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine the energy and effort it takes. That's incredible.
There's a lot of
yeah, and a lot of resources for sure. Yeah, I mean, has anyone else done, you know, what's the biggest, you know, a training like this that anyone's done? I don't know that I've done, yeah, Tammy, same thing. I've really not done anything nearly that big. I really like how you boiled this down into the lessons learned at the end and kind of gave some things that you see that we could use even in smaller trainings or, you know, any type of training, which is really great. Anybody else done anything that's kind of a larger scale training? I've deployed e-learning for, you know, 5,000 people.
Yeah,
50,000 people.
I think that that's an interesting thought. Like a lot of this stuff is done face to face, but you know, what type of elements can be done online? I know that this can start to get into you know, a whole different discussion of what's done online, what should be done in person. They actually do what they call a leadership training, and they'll have the leaders come out and they'll do face-to-face training, but then the actual battles that go on happen through a computer-based training program that they have. So there are elements of this that can be done on the computer.
Yeah. Karen has a question: if you're responsible for finding the civilian actors in the actual simulation.
What do you mean?
Karen, can you maybe clarify that?
Yes.
Are you on audio?
I'm hopefully, oh, of course, all the phones are going to ring. If you are doing the video of a simulation like this, and when you plan, you're responsible for finding all of the people that would go into that sort of thing. Does the Army already have those participants, or are you responsible for finding and vetting the non-military participants or the opponents that will participate?
Yeah, I'll let Walt speak to that.
Yeah, so basically the National Training Center contracts and hires civilians on a semi-permanent basis, and those individuals will replicate all the types of individuals that we could see on the battlefield, from just like Bethany mentioned, from tribal elders, town inhabitants, to mayors, to police forces, and to media. So all of those people are actually they're American citizens, but many of them, in order to replicate the cultural dynamic that the Army will operate in, many of those contracted civilians are from the Arab world, and they actually speak various different dialects of Arabic inside the simulation, which forces the Army to use its translators to communicate with the people in the town. So yeah, so they're contracted on a permanent basis. They're all U.S. citizens, but they come from a background which is different than American culture, to provide Army forces that cultural component in which they'll be required to operate overseas.
Thank you. One more question. I live out near, and as Patty's mentioned earlier, I'm sort of all over the place, but I live out near Indiantown Gap, which does training, and another training location a little bit further west of Harrisburg. And I've always been intimidated about even attempting to look at those contracts with respect to the details to which you participate. But apparently then there is a manual that is already provided for a lot of this. I'm not a military, my family has served, but I'm not military myself. So there is a bit of a background then with respect to the SOPs that are to be followed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Army has put a lot of time and effort. There are whole organizations that go into developing the background scenario to replicate the potential environments that the Army will be required to operate in. So their whole day is spent creating the scenario that transports the unit into Atropia and Donovia, in which they'll operate. And something that's really interesting about the NTC is that we say that we replicate, we don't duplicate. So it would be very difficult for us to make things exactly the way that things may be in Iraq or maybe in the Caucasus region right now. So what we try and do is we try and replicate scenarios that will be found where the Army could potentially operate, but not necessarily duplicate them. Because we're really interested in the scenario in helping leaders and soldiers know how to think and how to solve these complex problems, and not necessarily what to think. Right. So we're really training leaders to that adaptive level in which they might find themselves.
you are educating and not training, like Pavlov's dogs, which I always appreciate. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, this just reminds me of Christy. Christy, this is, you know, kind of the epitome of what you do, just, you know, in a little bit of a shift, but that's kind of what your sweet spot is, you know, doing it online. Looks like Christy dropped off, so she'll hear my comment later. Yeah, so that's really great. I like that we replicate, we don't duplicate, and really helping people think, not telling them exactly what, you know, just how do you adapt. Michael has a question, if there's any real-time mentoring, help, or performance support during the time in the box, or is it mostly the formal feedback in the last week?
You want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, so yes, there is tons of informal feedback and guidance that goes on. If it's an informal AAR, they actually call it a hot wash. So the OCs are there, they're picked because of their expertise. They've been around the Army a little bit, they've been around these specific operations that they're chosen for, and then they are there to provide guidance. So as the trainees are going through this, they can ask the OCs all types of different questions, and the OCs will be like, hey, maybe you should think about this over here. So there's nothing specific, like you have to tell them X, Y, and Z, but they are there to provide so much guidance and resources. So I don't know if you have any other.
Yeah, I would just say, so we have observer coaches that number 800 to 1,000 soldiers that are permanently stationed here at Fort Irwin to help those units as they come through. And I would say the ratio is 1 to 3. 1 OC per every 3 soldiers. So there's continuous mentorship that goes on throughout the 14 days that they're magically transported to Atropia. And we are right there with them. We're over their shoulder. We're providing guidance, mentorship. We're there to answer questions. And we can do everything but pretty much do it for them or give them the exact answer. So we're there with them every step along the way, in addition to the formal after-action reviews that we do at the end of each of those phases.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting to see the parallels of what we should be, you know, doing in our own training efforts on such a large scale. Very cool. Michael's asking what's Bethany's role in the training exercise, but Bethany really, this was a case study that Bethany did. She wasn't, she didn't do the training. She has subject matter experts that she consulted with to learn all of this.
Yeah, but I do get to listen to the radio all day long. And actually, it's really interesting. So they'll do a live fire exercise here. So we'll hear the big guns go off. It shakes the entire house. It feels like we're in a battle zone. You can hear the guns going off. So it's kind of crazy. So I don't participate, but I do get to experience it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Wow. Okay. So let's maybe talk about a couple of the questions that Bethany has on the screen for us. The first one is, when have you been able to maximize training? And one of the things that I heard, you know, the way that one of the really great ways to do that is to build in for the level of learners. So, you know, if you've got people that are less experienced versus more experienced, and, you know, that's something that I've definitely done in trainings that I've created. So, you know, an example of that is I created a point of sale system training. I've mentioned it a couple of times for Chipotle. It was a very large training, so it took a long time to create. So it sticks out in my mind as the course that would never end. But in any case, you know, some people just get point of sale systems, you know, they're good with technology. They can really ring up orders quickly. You know, they don't need much training, but really where they need the training is more around the policies. So, you know, like you're getting ready, someone asks for a margarita, you know, making sure that you follow the liquor policy and things like that. So the way that I did that in my training is I created a trainer named Elsa, and she would help you through. She's kind of like standing by your side all the time, and there's like an Ask Elsa icon. So if you ever get stuck, you can ask her. So we'll show you once, but that we only show you once in the whole training of how to do something. And then after that, you can always get help if you want to ask her. Her finger literally comes onto the screen and like points where you're supposed to click, you know? So it's kind of cool. It feels like a real person's there. But in any case, that's really great because someone that may need a little extra help, they've got it, and somebody that just wants, you know, they've already got it, they can speed through it, you know, different levels of learning. So what other experiences do people have? We have on the panel today, Shawn and Lita. So I'll start with you guys. Do you have any thoughts about how you've been able to get to the level of learners, or even answers to any of the other questions or thoughts about them? So it sounds like maybe Shawn or Lita doesn't. Does anybody else have any thoughts about taking into consideration the different levels of learners that are going to be taking your training?
I could speak up. So with another training that I'm working on, it's basically sales training 101, but we have different sales training for people who are beginning, but then we also have sales training for the coaches. Right now, like we're bringing it, well, it's been separate, but I think that it might be effective to bring them together potentially. So that the sales professionals can go through and go through their experience, kind of practice what they've learned, and then the coaches can learn how to coach their behavior as they are practicing it. I guess my concern is I wouldn't want them to be coached ineffectively. So that would be my only concern, like putting those two different levels of learners together. Obviously that happens here, but it happens as an organization. So yeah, if you're not getting the right coaching, well then that's really gonna affect the entire organization. So anyway,
yeah.
That was just an example that I had that I'm kind of working through.
Yeah, that's a good example and definitely something to consider. Any other thoughts about that? Otherwise, we'll move on to another question. This is, it's really interesting that you bring up the evaluating their own performance. And then, you know, with clients, that's one thing that I've found that is interesting. So I recently launched an online university, and so one of the things that we do is we have a survey at the end. We ask learners to answer certain questions, and those questions can be things like, is this going to make you better at your job? If so, in what ways? You know, what's the main point that you got out of this? So whenever we're asking these questions, it's interesting because it's good for us to know how effective they think it is in that moment. Now, they haven't had a chance to practice it, so that's really important. But just right off the bat, you know, what do they get out of this, and do they think it's going to make them better? And then also, what did you like about the training? And I know that's, you know, Kirkpatrick level 1, so we, you know, got to build on that. However, it is really great to get that information when you're dealing with clients, because right away, like the store that I have right now, it's a shoe store, and right away the managers are seeing, oh, actually the people really like this training. It seems to be, you know, making a difference in their perspective. These are some things that they said that they learned, and we also have a knowledge check so we can see how they're scoring throughout. And the knowledge checks are really not like, you know, multiple choice, what would you do here? It's very interactive and scenario based, so they can see how they dealt with customers. So that's something that I feel like even provides another level of value for your clients and keeps people coming back because they can see that. So if you don't build that, you know, those things in, then you're really missing a kind of a big bucket. Any other thoughts about, you know, building in ways to evaluate your own performance and self-reflection?
You know, a way that I have seen a course do that is they do just a quick star rating system, and so you can rate training courses. I think a lot of LMSs are starting to build in that capability. And I agree, I've seen clients who will get really, really excited about 4- and 5-star courses to get those ratings. So I think that if you can find a little bit more feedback, they're going to tell you why they liked it, what they liked about it, how that's going to help. I think that that provides a whole lot more value, but it was really interesting to see clients get excited about 4 and 5 stars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also know that there's a lot of LMSs, and I think one we saw recently, Genie, I think was the name of it, it provided a way for people to, you know, like a dashboard, you know, so if you're doing a really great, you know, you're interacting with a customer, or, you know, you're in a simulation like this and you rise to the top, then someone wants to beat that score. So that's definitely a really great way to see that. Karen, did you have something?
I was just going to say that I've used what I call takeaway sheets, or, well, depending upon the way the presentation is being provided, the session's being provided, where the learners have to sit and reflect on what we've talked about, what they don't feel they understand still and have to go back and look at, and what they feel very confident about, or how they feel it's going to fit into what they're doing. And you end up with some who do it very superficially, but as they move along and see the importance of it, that's helped to somewhat allow them to reflect on their own skill level.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. Michael had a question as well, and he said, you know, with so many levels of learning, there might be opportunities for soldiers in the squad to learn about strategies employed at the brigade level. Is this encouraged or catered for in the feedback?
Is that a question?
Yeah. Question, can you say this again?
Sure. Yeah. So Michael is saying with so many levels of learning, there might be opportunities for soldiers in the squad level or in the squad to learn about strategies employed at the brigade level. Is this encouraged or catered for in the feedback?
Yeah, I think the fascinating thing about this training environment is that the soldiers in the squad get to see their leaders perform echelons above where they're at. So the soldiers in the squad can see how the companies and the battalions perform, and leaders at the platoon or company level get the opportunity to see how the brigade commander and the brigade staff operates in real time. And then those leaders at lower echelons are brought into the AARs that have a target audience which is maybe above their level. So they have the opportunity to get insight into the lessons learned at a higher echelon than what they may have experienced throughout that battle phase. So we really encourage that multi-echelon learning, and that's because really the National Training Center is here to support the Army's leader development initiatives. And the best way to support leader development is to allow leaders at all levels to learn from those at echelons operating higher than which they are, to be able to take those lessons learned, their observations that they have, and then not only reflect on their own performance, but then reflect on the performance of their leadership and say, hey, this worked in this situation, this didn't work. When I get there, I'm going to do something differently, or I might do it the same based on the circumstances.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point about, how if you've got someone, that's doing a really great job and they're a leader, it's like, okay, I want to emulate that. And so they never really know unless you tell them, like, keep doing that. That's really effective for me. Or, hey, if you could tweak it this way, this will really help me. And so, that could be when I'm thinking of how do we build that into things that we create, for clients. That could be, the social aspect. I think about Slack so often. In Slack, I see how people with just us, within this community, people are dealing with situations that maybe I haven't dealt with. So they're maybe ahead of me on that, on that grain there, but I can learn from that. And then when it comes time for me to do that, then I know what to do. So thinking of that, how can you involve, social learning and learning from people that are a little bit ahead of you in a certain area throughout training? That's really great.
And what's fascinating, Patty, about these after-action reviews is that you'll have leaders of all different ranks and echelons, as I mentioned, in the same after-action review. And us as observer coaches, we encourage, and most of the time, the senior leaders, encourage candid feedback. So oftentimes we think of the Army as very hierarchical and very orders-driven and very yes, sir, and followers, if you will. But what's fascinating is in these AARs, there is opportunity for discussion and for people to point out when things didn't go so right, even if it's with their leadership. So to see the organization really interested in learning, and learning to a degree in which leaders are able to take constructive criticism is probably a window into a world that I don't think many civilians get to see or think about the Army, that we take the opportunity to do that and to have thick skins at times and to acknowledge when maybe things didn't go so right and learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually missing a lot in so many, pretty much most projects that I'm in, you get to the end, you don't really reflect, you move on to the next project. And what did you learn from that, So that's one thing that I always really tried to do, even when time was scarce, is, like I went on a video shoot once. It was my first video shoot where I was kind of the director, and it was the first video shoot that the guy who started working for our company was like the videographer for, and it was a little bit of a cluster. And so, but we were going to have to do that again and again and again and again. So go ahead and take the time in the beginning to say, all right, so let's talk about, like, here were the pain points. What can we do next time to resolve those and make sure that those don't even happen? Because then look at how much time we saved on every other video shoot. But it's just so often that's like the one thing that gets cut. You just move right on. So good point. Cammy's asking if the leaders go back and spend time improving their documentation.
They should.
Yeah.
So yeah, ideally they should. And if they're a good leader, they will go back and make those adjustments, specifically during that region week, that 4th week while they're here. That's ideally when they should be making those changes. So any more thoughts on that? I'm sure you get to see a lot of that happening or not happening.
So what's interesting is that I'm stationed here as an OC right now, but I have actually been a rotational unit 4 or 5 different times coming through the month-long rotations. And something that I learned is I need to look at how my procedures worked, my SOPs, my standard operating procedures. I need to look at their effectiveness and use the times when we pause the simulation, and then just as Bethany said, that week at the end to make notes on a hard copy of my processes and SOPs and what works and what I need to change before I leave NTC, because when the unit leaves NTC, life picks right back up, and just like with any other organization, you get focused on the next thing that's in front of you, the next mission set, and you forget everything you learned if you don't capture it while you're here before you hop on the plane to go back to the East Coast or wherever the unit came from. So we as OCs, we really encourage leaders to make the notes here of the changes that they need to make. But then just the last part is, like Bethany mentioned, we give them the executive summary, a narrative feedback that will inform the training that they should conduct after NTC, how they can improve, what different things they should take a look at to get better. So between making notes on their own processes and then the formal written feedback and recommendations for improvement we give them, between those two things, that should give them a way forward as they leave the National Training Center.
That's great. Yeah, and you're right. Unless you capture all those thoughts right away, you do forget them. So that's definitely do that right away. I like that. Sean has a question, so I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Yeah, hey guys, I know we're kind of coming towards the end as well, so this might be a slight diversion. But in terms of kind of online learning technology, I always kind of have it in my head that the US military is kind of a step ahead of a lot of other organizations. Do you see a lot of kind of newer technologies coming into play that could be used? I'm thinking things like virtual reality or augmented reality, or any of those type of cool things that that maybe my perception has.
Well, I would certainly say that the Army particularly in today's budget constrained environments, relies heavily on virtual and constructive training opportunities that we use both here at the National Training Center, but also that the units use back at their home installation wherever they come from. And so the Army has entire simulations that allow individuals from the soldier level up to about the 20 to 25 soldier level conduct operations in a virtual large room or theater, if you will, in which we can replicate scenarios for them to operate in. So the Army puts a lot of energy and focus on virtual training, so that when we get to the live training, we have a level of proficiency that already exists to make the live training more bang for our buck, just because of the resource-intensive requirements of conducting a live training scenario like we do here at the NTC. But as far as applications to the civilian world, maybe I could kick that to Bethany. I don't know if she has any ideas.
Well, I think that just what you said. So yeah, absolutely. The Army has a lot of virtual training that they do present. I know that a lot of, at least a lot of learning professionals that I've run into, they've started off as military contractors. And so they learn a lot from military training, but they use the virtual training to help everybody get ready and get set for a face-to-face training. So, I mean, they've been using blended learning for so long, and I think that's a really neat thing that they do.
Yeah, I like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, buddy. Just when you mentioned the getting a group in a large theater, could you describe that a little bit more? Just what the learner is experiencing. Are they wearing headsets? Are they watching something on a screen? What's their experience in that kind of virtual training?
Sure. They're large rooms that have extremely large screens, and there are different types. You can either be in a simulation in which you do have a headgear with display, or environments in which you don't. And then the control station of the room has the ability to present different types of environments and different types of situations in which the soldiers are required to react. So they can range from more of a conventional Army operation to operating inside a town with mostly friendly inhabitants, with a few insurgents that they may be required to respond to. The Army also has virtual shooting ranges. So the range inside a room will replicate the real live range that you go and shoot bullets at on targets. And so really it spans the gamut from the very simple running a range to the complex city urban operations.
That was a very good question, Shawn. That's very cool. I like that. We have a lot to learn from the Army's training. And we're at the top of the hour, so I just want to say thank you so much, Bethany, for getting all this, putting this together. I know it takes a long time, and just, you know, all the lessons learned that you brought to the top. It takes a long time to not only understand this process, but then say, okay, well, how can this transfer to what we're doing? So everyone, you know, like chat love, thank you, Bethany, for that. It was very, very helpful. Yeah, great presentation and discussion. And we will go ahead and conclude with that, and have an awesome week, you guys, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. See you later. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.